Hi guys, welcome everyone. My name is Vera and today I'm going to show you how to paint this super cool painting that you can see on your right here. Before we start on to painting, just want to mention that this is a video tutorial. It is a pre-recorded, it is not live, so you can pause it at any point, give yourself as much time as you need. You can make it a couple-day project if you need to, and the video is going to remain here on our channel pretty much forever. If you can't finish it today and you want to come back to it another day, that's totally fine. All right, so let's go all through all our supplies to make sure we have everything that we need for today. First thing that you're going to need is a canvas. I'm going to use a pretty small canvas today. This is 8 by 10 inch, but you guys are more than welcome to use any size that you'd like. You can go as big as you want or as small as you want. Just make sure you adjust the size of your brushes accordingly. Which brings us to brushes. I'm going to be using 3 different brushes today. A larger, medium, and small brush. I can't really call this brush a large brush because it's not. It's more like a medium large brush. It's the largest one out of the 3. We always recommend having a variety of sizes of brushes so you can choose which one works best for every particular step. So something larger doesn't have to be a true large, but just something on a bigger side for the background and generally a larger areas, something medium for a medium elements and small for fine details, which we have quite a few. So if you're using canvas that's much bigger than mine, you might want to up the size of these 2 brushes. So go with medium that's proportional to your canvas and a large proportional to your canvas. But regardless of the size of your canvas, you're going to be using a small brush, and the small brush needs to be the smallest one you can find. And the most important feature about this brush is it needs to have a nice pointy tip. So as long as it has a nice pointy tip, it will work regardless of the number or the size, as long as it has a pointy tip. But if you do have a set that's numbered, go with 0, 00, or 2. You can go as high as 3. This is actually number 3. So it's not the smallest brush, but because it does have such a wonderful small tip, I can still use it. And for these 2 brushes today, I'm gonna be using brushes with a rounded tip. As you can see, they're rounded brushes, but that's just a personal preference. You can just as well do this with any other shape brushes. They don't have to be rounded. If all you have is square brushes, you can still do this with the square brushes. It's not a problem at all. So I'm going to put my brushes aside. Another thing we're going to need today is a pencil. So this is just a regular HB pencil because we will actually start with a sketch. So make sure you have that. If you don't have HB pencil, any pencil will do. And if you don't have any pencil, you can just grab a small brush and make a very light color, maybe light blue or light gray, or even light yellow, and sketch with that instead. Which brings us to paint. We are going to need some paint. I will be using a pretty standard set. If you guys painted with us before, you know we only use primary colors of student grade acrylic paint, which is yellow, red, blue, plus black and white. We don't use anything pre-mixed. And the reason why we don't want to have to ask you guys to buy more and more paint every single time we create a painting, we want you to be able to do it with what you got. Plus, it's really good to learn mixing colors, and using just primaries will help you to learn that valuable skill. So we're going to be using primaries. Which shade of any color, it doesn't matter for this painting. Whatever shade of any color you have, you're more than welcome to use it. If you personally prefer to use pre-mixed colors, that's okay too. You can substitute, not substitute actually, you can add in addition to that green, because we'll be using that, and orange. But also again, we can mix them. They're pretty easy colors to mix. So if this is all you have, that's all that you need. You don't need any more than that. And of course, we're going to need some water because we can't paint if we don't have water. All right, so first thing that I'm going to do actually here is I'm going to start with my sketch. So I'm just going to grab my pencil, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to position my horizon line. And I would say I will position it right about the middle. So right in the middle of my canvas, I'm going to put a little line. You could put it higher or lower. That's entirely up to you. If you want to have more sky, put it higher. If you want to have more water, put it lower. But for me, I think middle is a good place to start. So I'm just going to put it right in the middle. I'm going to put one line right in the middle. Then after that, I'm gonna sketch my little islands here. So do you see I have a few islands? So I'm gonna sketch them all. I'm gonna start with this upper one, upper left one. So this little guy right here. And it's gonna start somewhere around here. So not right at the edge, not right in the middle, so somewhere around here. And it's gonna go curve down into the side, and I would say about the middle horizontally. It's not a precise math, this is just, if yours go further or less, that's no big deal at all. And I'm gonna bring it down a little bit. So again, this is approximately where it's gonna be positioned. And we can change that as we start painting as well. This is nothing is set in stone. You can work around it, you can change things. This is just a general idea of where things are gonna go. I'm gonna lighten it up a little bit too. Actually, I'll let it stay dark for now, but then I'll lighten it up when we move to the painting, because I don't like my pre-sketch too dark, especially when we're working with such a light colors. As you can see, this painting generally has beautiful soft colors, so we're going to keep it that way, and I don't want to see too much of a harsh line, so I'm going to lighten my lines, but I'm going to keep them dark for now for the sake of being a little bit better visible on a video. So the next one is going to be upper one on the right. So it's going to start somewhere right here, so a bit on the right or on the right side, but again, if this is the middle, it's pretty close, I would say, to the middle. And it's just going to go from here down. It's a little guy here, and maybe a little bit up on top. And then I'll add one more, and this one, the bottom, so a little tip of it is gonna start on the left side. So do you see in between this thing and this thing, between these two dots, somewhere right here, and I would say just a bit lower than the bottom of this island, so somewhere around here. I'm gonna add a little tail here and bring it a bit up. All right, and that's one more hill. So those are my 3 hills. I might make this one a little smaller, actually. To a bit more space on the bottom. So those are my 3 hills. I'm quite happy with them. Alright, now I'm gonna grab an eraser and I'm just gonna lighten them all up a little bit. And again, those are approximate shapes. If yours look different, that's okay. Not a problem. Alright, now this is nice and light and I like it, and we can move to our painting. So I'm gonna put my pencil and eraser aside, and I'm gonna grab my paint. And I'm going to start by using my largest brush. So the largest one out of the 3. Grab my water. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to do my top. So the top and the bottom are very light pastel. They're shades of this very nice, soft, warm blue with almost like a purple tint to it. If you wanted to get super fancy, you can even use a couple different shades. You can use some on a bluer side, some on a bit more on a purple side, some on a grayer side. But using just one shade of blue is totally fine too, because we're going to be mixing in white, so it will automatically create some lighter and darker shades. So again, it depends on how fancy you want to go here. But I'm going to start by mixing that one base color. I'm going to take my largest brush, I'll dip it in the water, and my base color, I'm going to start with white because it's going to be a fairly light color. Then to that white, I'm going to add a little bit of blue, not a lot, because again, I'm not aiming to create a dark color. And then I'll add just a little bit of red because I do want to give it a slight purple tint. I don't want to turn it into full on purple. I do want it to remain blue, but I do want to give it a warmer tint. And you may not need it to do this. It really depends on which pigment of blue you're using. In my case, we always use either primary or phthalo blue because those blues tend to be a bit on a colder side, and which is what's good about it is they're really good for mixing. They create really vibrant shades. No matter what they use them for, no matter what you use them for, they do create wonderful shades because they don't have any warmth premixed into it. But in this particular case, I would actually need to have a bit of warmth premixed to it. That's why I'm adding a bit of red here to create a bit of a softer, a bit more purpley shade of blue. So I think this looks like a really nice blue because do you see it's much warmer than the blue that I would have created without adding any red, but it doesn't look a full-on purple. It still looks blue. It's just a really nice warm and soft shade of blue. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna take this color and I'm gonna start filling my top. So the whole top is actually gonna be colored in vertical brush strokes. You do wanna focus a bit more on the bottom and the top here. Make sure they're pretty solid. Sometimes I would even go ahead and just add a line there to make it easier. And then I'll flick some from the bottom and I'll flick some from the top. So you see I added quite a bit of this color. It's pretty much almost all colored in. Yeah, there's some gaps. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take some white. I'm not even gonna wash my brush, I don't need to. I'm gonna take some white, I'm just gonna make sure it doesn't have too much paint left on it. And the rest I'm gonna fill in with white while everything is still wet. And you will see it's gonna start blending and create a multitude of different shades of blue, some lighter, some darker, and the entire thing is gonna be beautifully filled with a variety of shades of blue. And you can intentionally keep certain areas darker, certain areas lighter. If there are areas that you would prefer darker, such for me, for example, it's going to be a little bit here and a little bit there, generally darker, and the section just going to be a bit generally lighter. So to the sections that are generally darker, just add a bit more of the blue. To the sections that are generally lighter, add a bit more of the white. So you see, it looks really nice. And again, if you want to have a couple spots that are a bit lighter, you can even take more white and just blend it less. So just add a brush stroke or two and don't blend it too much. But this is optional. This is only if you want to have a few spots that have a bit more of a, I guess, distinct look and look a little bit whiter in general. So you see, I'm not blending them. I'm just adding a couple brush strokes and I'm letting them be because my underlay there is blue, so it's going to start blending and kind of getting it a less visibly white and a less brush strokey, if you may, if I start blending it. But this is just for this part, just because I want to add a little bit of accent of white. I'm not going to add that through the entire thing. I actually love how nice and beautifully light blended it is. Just wanted to add a little bit of white, a bit more poppy white and around this section, some white that pops a little more. All right, that looks awesome. So as I mentioned, if you wanted to go really fancy, now this is more than enough. You guys can totally stop here. You don't need to add anything else. But I do want to give you an optional step. So if you wanted to go really fancy, you can create an additional shade. You can go a bluer or more purpley color. So warmer, colder, grayer. So to the blue that you just used, you can add either a smidge of purple or a smidge of blue or even a smidge of black. But keep in mind it has to be the tiniest, tiniest little smidge. I'll actually mix a whole new color. I'll make a purpler version just to show you what that would look like. But again, I am not saying you should do it. I'm not encouraging you, but I don't want to discourage you either. If you do want to do it, go for it. Right, so do you see I made a color that's a little more purple and maybe a tiny touch darker, but it's not a massive difference. So this is the first one that we used. This is my second one. And I'm just gonna add it in a couple areas. Dry brush, so this time, you're gonna, if you decide to do it, you're gonna use a bare minimum of paint on your brush. Bare minimum. You're just gonna scrape the surface of your canvas. I'm gonna add some right here. I'm gonna maybe bring some from the top. Just make sure you add it to the sections that are not too light, I would say, as like you don't want to add it where the white is because it's going to be too contrast. You want to add it to the sections that are naturally already a little darker maybe. And dry brushing. It must be dry brushed so it doesn't look like blobby. It needs to be well blended, well merged. Or maybe I'll add a couple more, a little brush strokes somewhere. But this is good. Like this is wonderful. So this is what I meant by you could go fancy by going one more or couple different shades of something similar. But again, as you noticed, you can even rewind this video to compare before me adding this color and after what it looks like. Before I added this color and what it looks like now. It's not a massive difference, but the more of those little nuances you have in a painting, the more interesting it makes it in the end. So yeah, totally up to you. All right, I'm gonna let this dry because we do need this to start drying so we can start adding those beautiful yellow right here, the beautiful yellow glowing bush right there. So we're gonna leave it alone, and as that's drying, we're gonna work a little on our bottom. So for the bottom, I'm actually gonna go in a completely opposite manner of what I did on top. Do you remember how on top I started with blue and then I filled in white? So on the bottom, I'm gonna start with white and I'm gonna fill it with blue. Now I'm gonna wash my brush, make sure it's nice and clean and wet. I find that it's easier to work with wet brush here. And I'm just gonna take some white and I'm gonna fill in this entire bottom part with white. And I'm not really gonna be too careful around my lines. I can still somewhat see them. I'm not using my white too solid, I'm watering it down because the white here is a blending base. Your canvas is already white. You don't need to use a ton of white. You just need to use some of the white paint. So I usually water down my white pretty well when I use it like this as a base, as a mixing base over the white canvas. Again, just because I don't need to use a full-on solid white here. A, it would be a waste of paint. And B, it's actually going to slow down the drying, which kind of slow down the whole process. And then you're gonna lose your lines. You have to be careful around your lines because if you use a full-on solid white, then you may just as well lose your lines, which is fine. Like it's not a big deal if you do, but it's easier if you don't. So do you see I covered the whole thing with my white. And now I'm just gonna go back to my blue. I'm gonna take some of this blue. I don't have any left, so I'll mix it again quickly. I don't need much, I just need a little smidge of it. So again, just making a light, fairly warm blue. And with just a little bit of paint on my brush, I'm gonna start adding horizontal lines. So if the top was all vertical, The bottom is all horizontal. And you see how nice and light and gentle it goes on, because it mixes with all that white that we just added. So you can barely see your blue here. It turns into a really, really nice light color here. And if you have that second shade, if you use that, you can add that too. So I still have a little bit of that purpley color that I used on top. So I'm just gonna add a little bit of that to the mix. So as you can see, it's super, super nice and light, all of it. All right, and we're gonna let this dry as well. So we're just gonna leave it for a little bit, let it do its thing. And as all of this is drying, we're gonna move on to our islands for a little bit, and we're gonna add the base for islands. And the base is gonna be in the last most expected color, because when you look at them, they look orange, they look red, they look yellow, but there is actually a green base underneath all of them. So we're gonna create that green base. And guys, depending on how fast your paint dries and how fast of a painter you generally are, you may need, and how warm is your environment too. You may need to have a blow dryer, or you may need to take some drying breaks in between here, because this green will need to dry up a little bit before, it's just generally, not just green, there will be a certain colors that need to dry up a little bit before we move to other colors. This all was done on wet, but the rest is layering, and to preserve the vibrancy of colors. Between certain colors, we're going to need to dry it up. If colors compatible, you can put them together one after another without drying, but the colors are not most compatible. Like for example, I don't want to put a red or orange on top of my green unless my green is drier. Because if it's super wet, yes, you can pull it off still and create all on wet and beautifully, but it makes it very difficult, and the possibility of messing it up real bad, it's increasing highly. So that's why I would recommend drying it up, or at least partially drying it up in between. But we'll get there. This is just a heads up that if you do have a blow dryer nearby, that's great. You're more than welcome to use it. And if you don't have one, that's totally fine. It's not a problem at all. You can always just take a little break when and if needed. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna create that base green that I'm gonna use for the base of my islands. So you're just gonna, I'm gonna start by just mixing a medium dark green. How do we make green? Yellow plus blue. So I washed my larger brush. I will scoop some yellow on the side, and I'm gonna add a fairly large amount of blue, mix them up, and ta-da! It already turned into a medium dark green. So just two colors, don't need anything else. Now, here is another tricky part. I mean, it's not tricky, it's optionally tricky. You could just stick with this color. You could do all the bases with this color, or now you can modify this color just a little bit for every island. You can make one a slightly different shade, other slightly different shade. Again, you can make it a bit more interesting that way. But if you're like, hey, I got green, I'm proud of myself, then that's okay. Use your green. This is a great start. You don't need to complicate your life. But for those of us who do want to complicate our lives, I'm going to take this green. I'll put it on the side. This is going to be from my island on the left. And to this green, I'm going to add a few different colors. I'm going to start by adding a little bit of white, just a tiny touch. I'm not trying to make it much lighter, just a smidge lighter. And then I'm going to add an unexpected color, red, just a tiny smidge. And that will give it almost like a burnt, slightly brown undertone. That's what I want. This is the shade that I want to use for my left island. Again, you don't have to get that fancy. This one is just fine. But if you do, that's how we make it. Then I'm going to take this color and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to dab up the upper part of my island. And I'm going to make sure that it's a little bit fluffy on the top. I don't want it crazy fluffy, but I do want it a little bit fluffy on the top. The bottom though is not going to be fluffy at all. The bottom is just going to be straight linear bottom. And we'll actually add a bit more different color there later. But to start with, just a straight linear bottom is more than enough. All right, so do you see I colored in this left one? And now using either, if your brush has a tip, you can use just the tip of this brush. If your brush doesn't have a tip, you can switch to a smaller brush, such as the smallest brush or the medium brush. Just don't use massive brush strokes. If you can get fine ones, switch a brush. And because I have a really nice tip on this brush as well, I can just create really fine brush strokes with the tip. I'm just going to add a bit of a reflection on my water using the same green. You see, just a little bit. It needs to be so little, so fine. That's what you want. You don't want to overdo it with a massive, large brush strokes here. Just like a tiny touch. All right, I added this one. I'm happy with it. I'm going to let it dry. And as that's drying, I'm going to move on to this one. So this one, I'm going to take my medium dark blue. Do you remember the base that we made? I'm actually going to add more blue to it to make it a bit more emerald. And this is going to be my color that I'm going to be using for the one at the back here. And I'm going to do pretty much the same thing. I'm going to add it. I'm going to fluff up my top. Fluff, fluff, fluff. And I'm going to leave it alone so it can start drying. And then I'm going to move on to the bottom one. And the bottom one, I'm going to use the exact same color that I used right here. So this emerald green color. And I will actually start with the bottom here. So I'm going to go from this part here. I'll do my bottom. And I'll start filling it up, but I'm not going to go all the way up. It doesn't need to. You're not going to see any of the green on top there. So we're just mostly aiming to start there. To start this bottom, and then you can almost fade it into the rest. And then you're going to take, again, just a little bit of this paint on a tip of your brush or on a smaller brush. And with either tip of your brush or the smaller brush, you're going to add a bit of reflection. But again, I would say don't overdo this. Keep in mind it needs to be not too much of it. We still want to keep our reflection fairly light and pastel. Like, you don't want to overdo this. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the same green color that we just used here, and I'm going to add it to the bottom here as well. Just a touch of this emerald. And again, this is for those who are getting complicated. If you're using one color, you're doing just great, guys. All right, awesome. Done with my green. Now I'm going to wash off my brush, dab it up on a paper towel, And I could move to my yellow. That's the only color that I can move. Well, actually not the only, but one of the colors that I can move on to right away because it's very compatible with your green. The only stipulation here, your background needs to be dry. If your background is not dry, this one, the top, the upper background, that one is not dry yet, grab your blow dryer or maybe take a little break. Whatever works for you. And when it's dry, come back and move to that yellow. If your background is dry, but your green is wet, totally fine, you can proceed. So I'm gonna take my yellow, make sure your brush is nice and clean. And again, I'm still using this larger brush, but if medium one is easier for you here, because it's not technically the largest element, you can switch to a medium brush. So I'm taking my yellow, and I'm adding just a little bit of white to it. So I'm not adding like a ginormous amount of white to it. I don't want to create yellow that's almost invisible yellow. It's almost white. I do, however, want to make a lighter yellow. So I'm adding my white to it. I may even add a bit more than that. So you see it's still visibly yellow, like it didn't turn into a super pastel color where it doesn't even look yellow, it just looks like white with a tint of something. But it is much lighter than the yellow I originally had. So this is going to be my yellow for the bush. And I'm just going to start dabbing up the bush. I would say the bush generally would be a bit less than half of this upper space. And I'm going to start dabbing it up right here, because this is going to be the most solid part of the bush. And then I'm going to blend it into my green a little through dabbing. And once I did that, my brush is going to get dirty, so I'm going to wash it. And I'll refill it with my yellow again, and I'll continue. I'll add a bit more yellow here. Right, I'm happy with the situation there. So again, I'm going to wash my brush again, refill it with some yellow, and I'm just going to start adding more of what looks like branches. So using not too much paint on my brush because I don't want it too blobby, I'm going to dab up in different directions from a middle. So I'm starting from the middle because whenever I refill my brush, I have the majority of paint still on it. So I always start closer to the middle and then I kind of branch it out. Top, to the side. And once you branched it out a little bit, you can do a super light color now. So now I can take more white and make like a white with a tint of yellow. So do you see this one is so light that it almost looks like, yeah, white with a tint of something. It doesn't look like a full-on yellow. And I will take a little bit of that, and I'm gonna add some highlights. If this is still super wet, you can even use straight white. All right, and that is my glowing bush in the distance. So now I'm gonna go back to my just regular light yellow. I'll take a bit of that and I will go right here. So it's actually best to do this if this one is still somewhat wet, like you don't want it fully dry. Ideally, if it's fully dry, not a big deal, just use less paint. You want to dry brush it on if it's fully dry, but if it's not fully dry, you can use a little bit more paint because it will mix. And I'm gonna start dabbing. This actually may be a little too much, so I'll just dab off some my paper towel. Oh yeah, this is good. And I'm gonna start dabbing some yellow right here. So you see it starts blending into different shades. And in some areas you can see it like a full-on yellow. In certain areas it just looks like a lighter green. Just gonna add a bit of that. All right, and then I'm gonna do one more shade of yellow. So this time I'm gonna take yellow, mix it, add a bit more yellow into this yellow with a white to keep it super vibrant, but still have some white mixed into it. And then I'm gonna add the tiniest little smidge of red. Don't want to turn it into full on orange. I just want to make it a warmer yellow. So it should be like a warmer yellow, but still add some white into it, because it's going to give it a softer color. So do you see, this is the color. This is the color. This was the color without red into it. Oh, this is the color with red into it. Do you see, it's just a touch warmer. And with this color, I'm going to color in this entire top. I'm going to dab it up. I'm going to go right over here. And if your brush gets dirty, wash it off before we move on to water, because we're gonna add a little bit of that on our water as well, and you don't want to bring any more green in your water. So if you need to, wash off your brush in between. And then I'm gonna take a bit more of this warmer yellow that we just made, and with just a little bit of that, I'm gonna add some other water right here. You see just a little bit of that warmth. Just a little bit on the bottom here too. All right, and with a little bit more of this color, I'm gonna add some right here too. All right, awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. And after this, so we are pretty much out of the colors that we can't do on wet. Can't do on wet, sorry. The only other color that we have left that we can do on wet is black, so we're gonna do it now. We're gonna add our black, and then if needed, you may need to take a couple minutes to either just walk around and let it naturally dry, or grab a blow dryer, hair dryer, and just hair dry it. Whatever you prefer, or maybe your paint is naturally very fast drying paint and it will already be done, but just a heads up. So the only color that we can add here other than what we already have is black. I'm gonna switch my brush for this. If you're like me and you were still able to get away up to this point with using a large brush, now is the time that you switch and switch to a medium one. If you already had the medium for a while, great. You may actually even consider using medium and small, or just small here, because certain areas in black are going to be, certain lines in black are going to be really fine. So I'm going to be using medium for some, small for others. I'm going to start with a medium and take my medium brush. I'm going to take some of my black. For this time, I'm not going to be watering it down too much. I'm just going to water it down a very little bit. And the reason why my paint, naturally this particular brand that I'm using for black right now, which is Artist Loft, it tends to be on a thicker side, and I find that it does need a little bit of watering down, even for not too fine lines. Plus it's been on my palette for like probably about an hour now, so it thickened even a little bit more. But as we move to our really fine details, we're going to actually water down our paint quite dramatically. All right, so what I'm going to do with a medium brush, I'm gonna start by adding bottoms to my islands. So I'm gonna add the bottom right here to the island here. All right, I'm happy with this amount. You can add more or less, that's up to you. I'm gonna add just a little bit to this side too. And again, if it's easier for you to do this with a small brush, go for it. It's whatever works for you guys. For me, this still can get away with medium. That's why I'm using it. But if the small one is easier for you, do the small one for sure. All right, so I added some there. And I'm gonna add some right here now. Might even add a little bit right here. All right, looking good. And maybe right here too. Maybe I'll add a couple of dabs here. Just a little. And now I'm gonna add my tree trunks. So again, I'm gonna grab a fair bit of paint on my brush. And one tree trunk is gonna start right here. So it's gonna start on a bottom island. And it's gonna go all the way to the top. And if you can, try to make it slightly wider on the bottom and slightly thinner on the top. And how you do it is you apply a little bit more pressure on the bottom, and as you go up, you ease up on the pressure. So you start removing the pressure from your brush. It can be straight or not straight. That is entirely up to you. It doesn't have to be super straight. All right, so that's my tree trunk number 1. And a tree trunk number 2 is going to be coming out from this island, and it's going to come out from somewhere around here, I would say. The same thing, if you can make it a little bit wider on the bottom by applying just a touch more pressure, that would be awesome. All right, that's my 2 tree trunks. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually using the same brush. I'm gonna dab it off on a paper towel to make sure I have like next to nothing left. So dry brush, and I'm gonna add a shadow because I still want it fairly wide, but I want it really dry brushed. So from here, I'm gonna flick down. You see, very, very dry brushed. And the same for this one. Fairly white, but still very, very dry brushed. And those are my trees there. And I will add a few of those wiggly lines here. So again, with a dry brush technique. So basically next to no paint on your brush, I might even dry it up a little more. Just gonna add a couple of wiggly lines here. All right, done. And now I'm gonna use my small brush for next step. So I'm gonna wash my medium brush and I'll put it aside. And I'm gonna grab my small brush. And this is where I water down my paint more. Because small brush, if you're using small brush, that means you're trying to make a really fine lines. If you're trying to make a really fine lines, you are likely, well, not likely, you actually for sure need to have a pretty flowy paint, because if your paint is flowy, you can use just the tip of your brush make a really fine, long lines. If your paint is thick, for example, I'm gonna wash off my brush, dab it off with a paper towel, I'm gonna take a thick paint. And I'm gonna try to make the same line with just a thick paint. Do you see? It starts okay, but it doesn't last, and it ends with this broken tip. It doesn't give you ability to make really, really fine ends to your line. So anyway, water down your paint to the consistency of nice liquid paint. If your paint normally comes liquid, that's okay. You don't have to water it down. This is just a tip for people who using the paint that's on a thicker side, such as myself. And you see, now I can make really fine lines with it. Again, we're not trying to water it down for the color. We still want it solid black. We just want a consistency, a good consistency. And I'm going to start by adding a couple tree trunks on my left here. So I'm going to have 3 tree trunks. You can have more or less. That's entirely up to you. So the first one is going to go... Actually, I'm going to empty my brush a little for this, guys. That's my one tree trunk. Second one is going to be a little bent. And the third one somewhere right here. Great, 3 tree trunks. Shadow, same. Dab of your brush on a paper towel because it should be super, super light. And add a little shadow. Sorry, not a shadow, reflection. Reflection. Awesome. If you need to add a couple wigglies, you can, but also not a requirement. And now I'm going to grab a fresh watered down black paint. And with this fresh watered down black paint, I'm going to start adding the branches here. So all the branches are going to go from the tree trunk out. So they're all going to start at the tree trunk. And the same thing that we did with the tree trunks. The goal with the branches, ideally, is to have them a little bit wider, just a tiny, tiny smidge wider, where they start and then get thinner as they go towards the sides. So I'm going to start with like a middle branch here. You apply a little bit more pressure where you start, and then you slowly let go. So that's one branch. Do one more right here. Another small branch there. You can add as many small branches as you want, wherever you want them. You don't have to have the exact same positioning as I do. I'm actually adding a couple from the side there too, assuming that there are more trees there that we just don't see here, that didn't make it into the painting frame. But yeah, wherever your imagination takes you with the branches. All right, and that's pretty much it for our black. So now guys, this is where we do need this to dry up a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take a tiny little break to let it dry, but you can blow dry it if you prefer, whatever works for you. And whenever it's drier, I'm gonna come back, I'm gonna pause this video and I'm gonna come back and I'll show you the rest of it. I would say we're more than halfway through. We have maybe we're 60% through, maybe even 70% through. Yeah, I would say about 70% through. So we just have to wait until it dries and then we can finish it. Again, blow dry it if you want. I'm gonna pause this, give it a couple minutes to dry. My paint dries really fast, actually, probably will take 5-10 minutes tops. But for you, it will feel like a second because you are not gonna see that 5-10 minute drying time. You will literally see me move on to the next part in the next minute. But yes, make sure it's dry before you move to next step, and I will see you guys once it's dry. All right, guys, as I promised, it's only gonna feel like one little minute for you, and mine is fully dry. So I'm gonna move to my next color, which is gonna be orange. And you're welcome to use any brush that you feel like, except for probably small. I don't recommend small, but medium or large is good. I would say probably medium is a safer choice. But if you're very comfy with your large one, that's okay too. You're more than welcome to use that if you prefer that. So let's make our orange. I'm gonna scoop some yellow on the side. Let's put it right here. I'm gonna take some red, not as much as yellow, less. Mix it in, and definitely some white. And the reason why we have to add white is because we're not adding it over white canvas, we're adding it over sections that already have other colors laid. And sometimes student grade acrylic paint tends to be semi-transparent, which means unless you add white, you're going to see everything underneath it. You may not see it right away. It may look pretty solid while it's wet, but as it's drying, it's going to start getting more and more transparent. And then if, let's say, you add it over green, it's actually not going to dry orange, it's going to dry brown, because it's going to dry transparent orange over green, which makes brown. So anyway, this is the reason why we need to add some white to it. And you can make any shade of orange. Whatever is your favorite shade of orange, make that one. And I'm going to start on my left side. I'm going to dab up those little trees here. And I'm going to dab up this little island here. I'm going to start with the island, but that's just a preference. It doesn't have to be in that order. And I'm using my medium brush here. All right, and now I'm gonna dab up my trees. So the thing with trees, they're all gonna be triangular shape. So like that. Don't make them fully triangle. You don't want a perfect triangle. Just a general shape is that the top is smaller and then they get wider. I'm not gonna dab them up all the way to the bottom, by the way. The bottom stays undabbed, so they end before they hit the little island here. And don't fill them too much either. So I usually start a bit closer to the middle. So I start with small dabs and I start a little bit closer to the middle. So I'm gonna dab up this tree. Do you see a bit closer to the middle? And again, I'm not using like a ginormous amount of paint either, if you noticed. I'm using a fairly small amount of paint. And once I dabbed up closer to the middle, I can start extending it a little bit. And just add a couple more, almost like a flyaway dabs towards each side to make sure that my middle stays the most solid and my sides are a little more transparent and a little more loose, and just there's a wind in them. You want that feeling of wind. And these two overlap, so they're not going to be as distinct, but it's pretty much the same thing overall. It's the same technique, just not going to be as separatable, I guess. All right, so I have my trees dabbed up. That looks great. And now I'm gonna add a bit of dry brushed, so very similar to how we did before, dry brushed a reflection underneath. So just a bit of those wiggly lines here in orange. My 3 trees. And again, make sure you use bare minimum amount of paint on your brush. Don't use too much paint here. All right, and now I'm gonna move to the other side and I'm gonna dab up some right here. So I'm just gonna take my orange and I'm gonna dab some up here. And I'll also add a touch right here. All right, looks nice. Now I'm gonna move to my yellow. Once again, I'm gonna take yellow, mix it with some white, just yellow and white. You can add a smidge of orange too to make it a little warmer, but just make sure it's majority of it is yellow and white. And with this, I'm gonna dab right over my trees to add a little highlight. But don't dab over the sections that don't have any leaves. You do wanna highlight actual orange leaves. So you're gonna dab right over your orange leaves. Don't create any new leaves with this color. This is more of a highlight color than a creating color. So you see, I just added highlight with that. If you want to, you can add a bit on an island, but I personally wouldn't be doing that. And then I'm gonna add a bit of that to here as well. Even though I did have the yellow base, I didn't see harm in adding a little bit more again. And a little bit right here too. All right, and I'm gonna move to my red now. And you can use any shade of red and you can use a variety of shades of red. I'm gonna start with a super vibrant red. So I'm gonna take my standard base red, which in my case is actually a bit on a pinker side. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add some yellow to it to make it more like a fire truck red. Do you see? It has this now tint of orange to it. Under this fire truck red, I'm gonna start dabbing right here. I'm gonna dab up some of this beautiful red. Burning, burning, burning red right here. And I'll actually dab some onto this little island too. I would say I'm not going to dab as much as I did with other colors, but I do want to add a little smidge of something there. And then the next color that I'm going to use is going to be actually a darker red. So you can use the same. It doesn't matter which shade it has, whether it has a pink shade or orange shade, doesn't matter. But it's going to be a darker red, so I'm going to use this one plus a smidge of black. But make sure your smidge of black is tiny, like it needs to be very tiny, just to give it a little undertone of that deepness, like dark cherry red. Yeah, this is very cherry red, so this is what you're looking for. Maybe even slightly burgundy color. All right, and with this color, I'm gonna go on to my leaves here. And very similar to what I did on my left, I'm gonna add leaves onto the trees here. I'm gonna dab them up. Don't use too much paint on your brush. Maybe I'll even dab it off a bit on a paper towel to make sure I don't have too much. And I'm adding it almost like in the little clusters. First, I'm gonna add it on the branches, and then I'm gonna add around branches, tree trunks, and in the little clusters, and then I'm gonna add some flyaway leaves too that are gonna be flying into the distance, because again, it's a windy day. All right, so I did some leaves. Now I'm gonna add a really, really small dabs. If it's easier for you to do this with a small brush, you can. Again, because my brush, my medium brush has a pointy tip, you can totally get away with just doing this with a medium brush pointy tip. And I'm gonna add some flyaway leaves. Gonna be really small. All right, and I'll also add some of this darker color on this island here. And then I'm going to dry brush on the bottom some of the reflection, similar to what we did here, except I'm going to do some larger ones, some loose larger ones on the bottom here with a medium brush. And then I'm going to switch, wash my brush, dab it off on a paper towel. I'm going to take small brush and I'm going to do this, guys, with a small brush here. It's just a tip. All right, and that's my reflection. So now the only thing that I have left is, actually not only, but the two things left. One of them is, I'm gonna go back to my medium brush. You can stay with a small brush, it's totally fine. And I'm gonna go back to my orange. And I'm going to add a bit of orange highlight, not a lot, but just a little bit of orange highlight on this beautiful burgundy branches right here. And again, just like we did on our left side, you're not going to be adding the orange on the areas that don't have any leaves. You're actually going to be highlighting the burgundy leaves with this. So just dab orange right over some of the leaves. You don't have to do it over all of them. I would say wherever there are most clusters that you kind of want to break up a little bit or add a bit more color so they pop better, that's where you add a bit of orange. And then the very last thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a little bit of white or light blue highlight to our tree trunks. So you can take either just straight white or you can take white with a little bit of blue, either just regular blue, or you can mix in a bit of red too to make it a bit of a warmer blue, how we did for our background. This is what I'm doing. I'm making a smidge of that warmer light blue again. And with this, I'm going to add just a tiny touch highlight onto my tree trunks. So just a tiny highlight. Ta-da! And it is done, you guys. I hope I made Gregory proud. Gregory is the original artist who created this painting and kindly gave us permission to teach it. He is pretty awesome, and I hope if he ever sees what I did with his painting, he will be very proud of me. I hope so. I don't know, but I hope so. And I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial and have a beautiful result. I would love to see how your paintings turned out. You can share them with us and you can post them on our Facebook page. You can post them in our Facebook group. You can post them anywhere, technically, wherever you want to post them. Yeah, and just show them to us however you will. Actually, guys, I just noticed there was one more tree. There was one more tree right here. I did two. Again, it's not a big deal, but let's add a third one for the sake of having it. Let's do it. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah, looks good. And I don't even need to add any more leaves there because I already have some branches, maybe just a little highlight. Huh. That looks nice. Alrighty, guys. Well, thanks for joining me. Again, please share your results. Would love to see how they turned out. Hopefully, I'll see some in a Facebook group. I'm going to add link to where you can share them in the description of this video. So just click on a link. It will bring you right where you need to share them. If you would rather not share, that's okay. There's absolutely no pressure for you to share your results, but we always love seeing how they turned out. So if you do want to share, we'd greatly appreciate that. And thank you guys for all your support. For those who tipped us already, we greatly appreciate it. You guys are awesome. And if you just came across this tutorial, you're like, wow, I actually liked it. This was fun. I learned something new. And you want to say thank you by tipping me, you're welcome to do that. There's a link in the description of this video. It's a PayPal link. You just click on it and you can leave any tip that you would like. And of course, all tips, big or small, are always so greatly appreciated, you guys. And if you liked it, but you're like, my finances are tight, want to say thank you other way, no problem. You can leave a kind comment, you can put a like, you can share this video with your friend. We appreciate all the support. And we'll see you guys next time. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, do that. We have lots of beautiful videos here already uploaded, and we do have about 1 to 2 new ones coming every week. So there's always something new and fun to look forward to. And I'll see you guys next time. Thank you. Bye, guys.